Welcome to UEN SciFi Friday, the podcast where science fiction film meets reality. In this episode, we'll discuss the Fritz Lang classic Metropolis, filmed in Germany and released in 1927. I'm Rich Finlinson, and my guest is Jeremy Nielsen of Spy Hop Productions in Salt Lake City. Jeremy, nice to have you with us again on SciFi Friday.
It's great to be back. Thanks for having me, Rich.
Hey, what did you think of this this classic science fiction film that was made more than 80 years ago?
Well, as a former film student, I'm surprised that it's taken me this long to actually sit down and watch it. But I was actually quite surprised with both the science and art of the whole picture, how advanced it was for the time period. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
I understand that among film students, Metropolis is known for using this special effect called the Schuften process. Can you talk to us about what that is and why it's important?
So the Schuften process, as I understand it, is you're kind of doing some in-camera compositing. Compositing is generally taking two images and smashing them together into a new third image. And while we do that digitally nowadays, Schuften created a technique where you would shoot through a mirror that was held at, let's say, roughly a 45-degree angle, and a portion of the mirror has been scraped away to where it's just glass, and the camera would see through that portion, filming live actors doing something perhaps in the background, or even maybe a mural or something back there. And then the mirror half would reflect something that's off to the side of the camera, which could also be a variety of other actors or a scale model or a painting there or something.
Was it obvious to you as you watched the film when they were showing something where there were actually humans climbing stairs, or when they were showing a miniature version of something that looked like that?
There was a shot or two that I feel like I could see, because part of the drawback of the process is there's the line in between the two images that you might have a change in contrast or a change in exposure there. And there was a shot or two that I felt like I could see, there's the top half and the bottom half to this picture. But I'll bet most of them, they totally fooled me on them. I was looking for them, but I feel like I only saw maybe a couple. And I'm sure there were many.
As a filmmaker yourself, how do you think they did with telling a story with this film?
Well, that's one of the things that I was most pleased with the picture. Is how advanced the visual storytelling process was. Yes, they relied on these title cards that would come up and give you bits and pieces of dialogue or narration, as it were. And that's part of the charm of filmmaking that's different than every other art form, is we're using images that are moving, and so we can tell a story in a unique way compared to other art forms where they have their advantages. This is, I think, film's great advantage. And I think they did a wonderful job, especially the opening sequence when the workers are going into the mines. The day shift is switching over for the night shift, and they had all these actors with their heads down, just walking very slowly up to the elevator, all in time together. And these are very iconic moments. But the camera was, shooting from a very oblique angle. And if you notice, all the set pieces are also shot at an oblique angle, because part of the problem with film is you're trying to take a three-dimensional space and represent it two-dimensionally while still making it look three-dimensional. One of the best ways to do that is, instead of shooting a house from straight on, shoot it from the side so we can see at least two surfaces. And if you'll notice, all the set pieces and the paintings in Metropolis are all from a corner, so that you can see two sides of it, thus creating this three-dimensional look. And I think those little bits that they use to help both advance their technique and tell a story, I think people still struggle with that stuff today, especially a lot of the students I work with. And if you watch a lot of the stuff on YouTube, there's these advances that were discovered 100 years ago that are still sometimes an abstraction and difficult to wrap your head around. And unless you've really studied movies, you wouldn't think to shoot things that way. But these guys had nothing to study. They had to invent it all as they were going. And I think that's part of what was exciting to me to watch it, is they did some things that we nowadays we wouldn't do. But just the visual storytelling of the whole process, I think, was very advanced. and is still, it's not dated at all today to me.
Tell me why it's important to you to both learn and teach about film.
I look at it in two ways. I think the first one is storytelling in general. I think humans must tell stories. I think it's somewhere deep inside of our genetic code or whatever, where we must tell stories. If on the first thing Monday morning at most people's work, everyone gets together around the water cooler and talks about what they did this weekend or what was on TV last night or whatever. And I think we have this innate need to tell stories. So I think filmmaking has become a great way to tell those stories because it has been so democratized. I think the second way is symbolized by a comment I often make in my classes. I always like to tell my students, that day when you were in math class and you asked, when am I going to use this in real life? Today is that day. Because I think that filmmaking is a great way for me to disguise math, physics, science stuff, and students get really into it because they don't realize that it's not been called math and science, so they'll do these really complicated math and science problems, not realizing that they're doing them. And I think that's very important, and it's a great way to reinforce what they're getting in school.
Can you give me an example of how you would use math in the filmmaking process? What is one of those moments where you're talking about math, but they don't really know it yet?
Okay. So one of the common ones is I do a big lesson on film versus digital, and what are the differences between the two of them? Because we've been chasing this brass ring of filmmaking for all these years, but now the digital process has become so cheap that we can all do it. So generally people want to make their digital movie look like a film movie. So we talk about, well, how can you do that? And what's the difference between the two? And one of the big differences is the U.S. television system is based on a frame rate of 29.97 frames a second is what you're seeing. Whereas the film world is at 24 frames a second. So that slight change in the frame rate creates a massive difference in the way it looks. And I always describe it as it's the difference between going to a movie and watching a soap opera. They have a slightly different feel to the way they look. So we do the math and try to figure out, well, how can we make our digital stuff, which is shot at roughly 30 frames a second, look like something that's shot at 24 frames a second? And so then they start getting into this math and figuring out, how can I do this, and what are the techniques, and what kind of cameras can I use? And then I love to drop on them. We talk about how the reason why the U.S. television system is based on the 30 frames a second is because of our power grid. There was no way to sync up the camera with the television set, so the engineers faced the problem of, well, how do we get what I'm filming play at the same rate as what's being shown on the TVs? They said, well, we have this power grid, and it's running at 60 hertz, so we'll attach everything based on that clock of 60 hertz. And I love to ask the question, well, why is it 29.97 and not 30? And I'll have at least one student who will finally figure out, well, it's because color TV. They needed a little bit more space in their bandwidth to throw the color signal in there. So every 110 frames, they drop one, thus giving us 29.97 frames a second. So
okay,
that's incredibly nerdy.
So black and white television was 30,
yes,
and we had to steal a little bit of data room for color.
Exactly, and thus 29.97. So that's very nerdy math, but because it's filmmaking, I can get a bunch of 16 and 17-year-olds to get really interested in the difference between 30 and 29.97.
Hey, getting back to the movie.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no problem. Is Metropolis a must-see film?
I think in the canon of silent film, I think it's a must-see film. It is very different than say Birth of a Nation or The Great Train Robbery or these other, or the Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin films. It's very different than those other iconic films. It's part of the German Expressionist movement, which is a very important movement, I think. So it kind of is lumped in with the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or perhaps even Nosferatu a little bit. But it's very different than them in that it's more of a sci-fi piece. But I think it's important to note, and maybe this is where its greatest value comes, is it's clearly not just an entertainment piece. It has a message. It's making a statement.
Jeremy Nielsen, director of the film and video department at Spy Hop Productions. Thank you for being with us again today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'd love to be back again.
UEN SciFi Friday is a production of the Utah Education Network. Our production and web crew includes Michelle Dumas, Jen Gibbs, and Karen Creer. Our executive producer is Laura Hunter. I'm Rich Finlinson, inviting you to learn more about the movie Metropolis and careers in media at the UEN SciFi Friday website, online at uen.org/TV.